Inspiring Greatness, a conceptual understanding of a parent's role in a classical leadership education. If we could please stand and join each other in Pledge of Allegiance. It's a great way to start our evening. Salute. Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. My name is Carlos Iniguez. I'm the Dean of Scholars here at John Adams, and we thank you so much for being with us tonight. And we thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of not only self-discovery, but the creation of community. And we're so fortunate to have these evenings that are inspired by this great way of learning, but also to be inspired by each other. Very few of us who have grown up inside traditional education models realize the impact that a classical leadership model has on the individual, but not only the individual, but the family. And this is something that's very near and dear to me, as my father was an educator. He was a language teacher. And if I look back as my mentor and my hero, his biggest effect on me wasn't necessarily the lessons he taught me, but it was his great love of literature, his great love of discussing the great books and the great discussions that we had based on the literature. And so if I think about the things that my dad transmitted to me, I think about his great love of literature and the way he was able to explain to me his love and his passion and his search for the truth. So tonight we're going to learn that a classical leadership model really has the power to transform any relationship into this mentor relationship, and that really what it does is it elevates us into a state of what we call a symbiotic influence upon one another that is based on the demonstration of virtue and care. Now that is a very educated, in a sense, description of what we'll talk about tonight, but really the classical model is very simple. It is read classics, share and discuss. And to be a great mentor for your child, to have an influence on another, is not necessarily to have this great learned ability to transfer information, but it's simply to have an impact on the heart and a presence in the mind. So as we learn tonight, this is a very simple matter that all of us can undertake, that all of us, in a sense, can find a way to not only look for a mentor in our life, but find a way in our own children's life to think about our role and how we influence them, but more important, to grow our relationship. This evening we're so fortunate to have Sharon Fenton, who's going to be coming up here shortly, and who will describe some of the more practical ways regarding this process. And once again, we thank you for being here tonight. We hope that you are as inspired as we are by your presence here. And without further ado, this is Sharon Fenton. Thank you.
I'm really excited to be here. Just by quick of introduction, I have an 11th grader here, just one daughter. She's my youngest, so that's as early as we could get in. The last, the very highest grade. And so I'm really jealous of you parents who have kindergartners getting to start at this school. My husband's in the back with me, Greg, and then I have an older daughter in college. So even so, we've been on this journey a long time. I pulled out my kids from public school when they were in 2nd and 4th grade, and that's where we started this journey of Thomas Jefferson education, or what's now been transformed into classical leadership education. And we've learned a lot along the way, what works, what doesn't work, but we also learned some principles that are really useful to understand, and when you can understand these principles, it's much easier to apply them in your home. And so let me just I'll just give you a little bit of history and take you back a little bit. Probably, gosh, I want to say 6 years ago, I have no idea, maybe 7, maybe 5. I was teaching a homeschool class, and I had several students. I was teaching a Cave Liberty class. It was basically the foundation of American history, or at least from like 17th century on, and then also a statesmanship class. And one of the foreman's sons was one of my students. And we we started there. It was one of my first classes I taught. I don't know why they trusted me, but they did. I'm grateful for that because it helped shape a lot of what I understand about classical leadership education now. And so as the journey went on, probably maybe a year after that, I got a call, and it was from a friend of mine, and she said, hey, Dean and Paul want to start this statesmanship program in the summers. It's a 2-week statesmanship program, and they just want to meet up with us. And we'd already put on a youth conference, so we'd done simulations. We'd already been using a lot of these principles in our classrooms and in our homes, and so I think they were just looking to pick our brain. They already had their own ideas. It was just more of a collaborative time. And so we got together. We were there for a couple hours at the foreman's dining room table, hashing out some details. I think maybe we met up one other time after that. And then about 6 months later, I was talking to my friend, and I hadn't seen the foreman in a while. I'm like, what's going on with the statesmanship program? I haven't heard anything about it. And she's like, I don't know, I haven't heard anything. About maybe 6 months, a year later, all of a sudden we get a call. Well, Dean's talking about starting a school. Like, oh, that's what happened. I get it now. Okay. And so that's what's really been exciting about this is not only have I got to see the plant, the bloom, I actually got to see the formation of the seed. And so it's almost magical for me, and I sometimes even get choked up walking down these halls to see how it's all come to fruition. And it's a little bit like magic because back when we were sitting in the foreman's little conference room at the time, he's got a bigger one now, but a little one, very warm, hashing out a lot of what you see up here, I got to see the formation, and then I kind of backed off because we had some other things going on at the time. And so by the time I got to the school, I got to see what it looked like in this little boardroom, and all of a sudden it's a school. So it's like magic to me. Like it just magically appeared. But I know a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into it, and money, time, energy, and I really appreciate it and all that everybody else puts into it. But it's kind of my journey. I've been doing this a while, and I've learned some things along the way, and so I want to share those with you. Back when the school was forming, I put together this pamphlet, and I handed it out for, I put a handout over there for everyone. And it will detail some of the things I'm going to cover tonight. I'm not going to cover everything because there's a lot I want to cover, and I have a very short amount of time to do that. And so basically what I want you to understand or walk away with is an empowerment to be able to do something like this in your home. And I know we're all busy, so I'm hoping to give you some tips that will make it realistic. I know we all have an ideal view, but we need to be practical too. I want to start about talking about Mortimer Adler, and he was a university professor at the University of Chicago. He's a law professor, and he founded the Great Books Foundation, and he wrote this handy little book. It was called How to Read a Book, which you think, yeah, if I can read the book, I must know how to read a book, right? But a friend recommended it to me, and I learned some great things from this book. First of all, it's not the most exciting book. It's, don't break out the popcorn and for this book. But there's some really important things you can take from it. And what I learned are the 4 levels of reading. And there are 4 levels he identified. And the first one he identified was elementary reading. And what he says is the very first stage is just learning to read the letters on the page, just sounding it out. And it's the very basic passive form of reading. And usually, kids master that at a very young age. The second level is inspectional reading. Now, this is something that we all do. If you read the newspaper, you're an inspectional reader. If you, pick up Hunger Games, unless my family likes to dissect it to death, it can be, an inspectional. You're just reading for fun or information. Textbooks can be inspectional reading. And it's just this idea that you're just reading for information. You're trying to take in as much as you can, and then you want to be able to kind of regurgitate that information, so to speak. So it's also a very passive form of reading. It's not an active form of reading. You're not necessarily engaging in the text. You're basically just reading for information. So the next level then is analytical reading. Now, inspectional reading is what we do in elementary school, junior high, high school, not this high school, but in many high schools. And even at college level, we just basically stop at this inspectional passive form of reading. The next level, though, what he said is analytical reading. And analytical reading is different because it forces you to engage in the text. And what you're doing is you're challenging the author you are asking questions, or you're making an assessment, you're trying to form an opinion, like, well, do I agree with this author? Do I not agree? Why do I do this, or why don't I do that? And I think in some cases we do this naturally, but when you can do it in a forum where you have an opportunity to discuss these things or to write about them, there is a greater opportunity for growth and learning when you can engage with other people and see what their ideas are, bounce your ideas off, because we all have our own paradigms, and when you can experience these with other paradigms, you gain more from it. So that's basically analytical reading. You'll see it sometimes in literature classes. There's a lot of analysis that goes on, and I think you'll be experiencing a little bit of that tonight. And then the highest level, he says, is syntopical reading, and it's this idea that you can read multiple sources. You read across, and I'll give you an example of this. You can read several sources, and then you start to define problems. You start to investigate more. What are some of the other things I wrote down here? You're creating a newer work. And often you're creating a work greater than what was already put out there. And I'll give you an example of this on a very small scale. When I was teaching my Cube Liberty class, the very first book we wrote, mind you, this is a class about the foundations of America. The very first book we read was The Red Scarf Girl. Does anybody know that book? So it's a fantastic book for younger children to read about Chinese Cultural Revolution. So that's the book we started with for American Foundation. It's called The Red Scarf Girl, and it's by Jilin Sheng, and it's all about Mao Zedong and his rise to power in the Red Guard and the Cultural Revolution and what took place during that time. Why would we start an American history type class with that? Well, because it became our point of discussion when we were discussing freedom. We had something for the kids to measure that against. Like, look at what happened here. And because sometimes reading the Founders isn't always so accessible to the kids, especially if they're 12 years old. So if you can give them something to connect to, a measuring stick of what it looks like not to be free, and weigh that against what it looks like to be free, that gives them a context in which they can understand it better. So that's what I mean when you're reading across multiple sources and you can compare things and contrast, you can question, investigate, all the things that happen at that syntopical level. And that's a very basic understanding of it. We see that this type of reading happen at many higher levels, which I'll talk about when we get into the other side, the other column on math and science. But you ask, like, how might I do that in my home? I can't read all these books, right? Who has time? So what you can do is just start off with your reading as a family. You just start asking questions. And the example I use in here is that The Giving Tree. It's a very short book. You can read it with adults can read it and have a fantastic, in-depth discussion on that. But you can start out with your little children. You read it and you just ask them, when you're given something, do you owe the giver? And they can say, well, of course, because they did something nice for you, so you need to do something nice for them. Or, well, no, it was a gift, so you say thank you. I mean, they start to formulate their own opinions. And then you can start drawing that out from that, other things from them on that. And it just starts to get them familiar with what it is to have to think about what you're reading. Because sometimes we just read a story, like, wasn't that a good story? And we close the book and we put it away and we've missed those opportunities. And so this gives them that opportunity to start anticipating questions. When they think you're going to ask them a question, they're going to pay attention a little bit more, they might be thinking a little bit more, and it really does make a difference. And as they get older, it'll become natural for them. So that's really easy when you're talking about English, history, things like that that are, more literature-based. But how do you do that in math and science, right? How do you read classics and discuss those things? So one of the things I talked about in here, in my statesmanship class that I teach, we do a section called Characteristics of a Scientist. And we talk about not just what it means to know the periodic table of elements, to know the structure of a cell, to know how to do the Pythagorean theorem. We want them to think like a scientist. We want them to think like a mathematician. And in doing that, they have to learn these certain characteristics of scientists, mathematicians. And so I go through them in here, and you can look at them in a little more detail, but some of the examples I give, scientists challenge prevailing assumptions. They see patterns. They see patterns in nature. They see patterns in life. They see patterns. If you're a sociologist, you see patterns in society. You see patterns in psychology, but they see patterns. They ask original questions and they experiment. Often the scientific, this gave birth to the scientific method. Thank you. I say revolution, but this is science, not history. And so, when you can employ these principles, then they can start thinking in that way. And so I gave some examples in here. The first one I talk about is Hippocrates. He challenged the prevailing assumption that diseases were not caused by the gods; they were caused by earthly exposure, earthly diseases. And he says, you can't just chant over people and they'll be cured. And he was very much ridiculed for that. So he had to show a lot of great courage to be able to stand up and challenge that assumption. It's where we get the Hippocratic Oath from. I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with it. But so he did that, and he was able to see that there were certain symptoms people had, and he could give a diagnosis. And we even use this today. I mean, this is something applicable even today. If you're going to the doctor, what does he do? Now he's got the computer. He will chart, he marks down what your symptoms are and gives you a diagnosis. The other one was, the next one is see patterns. Edward Jenner saw the pattern that cowpox people who contracted cowpox did not contract smallpox. And from that, he created smallpox vaccination. He injected small strains of the cowpox virus into people, and they effectively eradicated smallpox. I know there's a lot of controversy about vaccination, but at the time, it eradicated smallpox. Then we have Lavoisier. I'm clearly not taking French. Antoine Lavoisier. He asked these original questions. Something's taken in the lungs. What is that? How does it act? And what does it mean? And so he experimented, and he defined oxygen. He discovered oxygen, and he became our father of modern chemistry. And so because he had done those things and taken the initiative to ask those questions, you think everything we have today has been invented in some way. Someone had to ask what that breath is, what is it that makes my hand move? There's got to be something in there that makes it move. And so those are the original questions that you ask. I know we feel like all those answers have been answered, but there's so many other questions we have that we can move in that direction. And the last one was apply knowledge. And when I say apply knowledge, I'm talking about across various fields. And this is where you get into the syntopical part of it. John Lister was, I think he was a regular MD, I'm not sure. But he had been reading a lot about Louis Pasteur. And if you know who Louis Pasteur is, he's the one who created pasteurization. And he had learned that through high temperatures and chemical compounds that you could kill microorganisms. And so John Lister took this idea and said, wait, okay, if you can do that, why can't we do that in the operating room? Because at the time, people would rather take their chances sometimes with gangrene than have surgery, because there was such a great chance of infection during that time that they might contract another infection, or a tooth pulled, whatever. You just suffer through the pain because you may not survive an infection. And so he discovered this method, or this use for carbolic acid as an antiseptic, and because of that, it dramatically reduced post-operative infections. And so we can thank him for that. Anybody who's had surgery, you can thank John Lister for that. And so, but he took this idea that Pasteur had, and he applied it to something else. And so that's that idea that you can still have some topical type discoveries in math and science. Just like you can take the side of here, on what I have on the right side, even though I've delineated them, you can take that and move it onto this other side, this idea of literature and history. What are the patterns? Ask original questions. If you're diving into a text, you want to ask questions maybe that other people haven't asked, or you want to see patterns of symbolism, or you discover a motif through patterns. And so there's ways to apply these on the historical literature, even psychology is still science, but sometimes you skew the lines a little bit. But there are ways to apply this across the board. You don't just have to delineate between the two. So I say all that, and then I'm sure you guys are like, well, okay, I don't have time to study all the scientists and learn all these characteristics, and I don't have time to read all these books and gain all this knowledge. And so what I want to do, and I'm running out of time, so I've got to do it quickly, is give you some means for doing that. So as far as how to think, so how many of you have high school students in here right now? Anybody have? Okay, I have a high school student, so I'm going to use examples from there because that's all I have. My daughter's reading The Awakening in Miss Schaefer's class, and I happen to have read that book. They read The Scarlet Letter, but I haven't read that one. So with The Awakening, we were talking about it, and she's kind of like, I really don't like this book. And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, I don't like it either, so I feel your pain, but I didn't want to say that to her. So I started out by asking her, what don't you like about it? And so I started probing, and you can start asking them questions. If you know the story, it helps. But you can still draw things out of them. What don't you like about it? She's like, oh, she's such a whiner. The protagonist, and so she kind of is. And so, not to jade you, but if you read it, but she is kind of a whiner. And as the story progresses, she is someone who's really just not happy with her life, and in the end, spoiler alert, she killed herself. And so we talk about that. What does it mean to be happy then? What is happiness? Because she kills herself because she's not happy. She feels like she can never be happy in this gender construct that limits her ability to be her full self. And because of that, she commits suicide. That's my take on it. So we work through this, and but you can ask them, well, what does it mean to be happy then? And then that's where you can jump off from that point. But you really do need to know the text to have these types of conversations with your children. Now, if you have 4 kids in 4 different classes, 4 different grades, reading 4 different books in English, or studying 4 different types of science, studying 4 different periods of history, what are you going to do? Okay? So hopefully the educational powers will not strike me down here when I give you these suggestions, because I'm going to give you a few cheats. I am going to put a little disclaimer on here, though, that says the most ideal way to do it is to read it when you can and discuss it with your children. And so that really is the crux of it. And I will tell you what about that, though. You will get the best education of your life, better than any college education. Homeschooling my children has given me a far better foundation, or far better education than college has. And I'm in college right now. So, and I feel like a genius because I'm like, man, I already know all this stuff because I did it back when my kids were going through high school. It's just repeats kind of what you know and already learned earlier on a deeper level. So some of your cheats that I'm going to recommend, again, saying that you should read the text if you can, is SparkNotes. If anybody knows SparkNotes, it is a great resource. And I would even say that even your students, if they're struggling with the text, is a great resource for them to go, not as a substitution for reading it, but as an aid for reading it. That's what CliffsNotes was designed for, but everybody used it as a crutch. But a smart teacher will know if you have a good teacher, SparkNotes, CliffsNotes won't do the trick in class, and I don't think that works here so much. But it's enough for you. Has anybody been on SparkNotes? It's all classical literature. So they have a great summary. They'll do a character analysis. They give a summary and analysis of each chapter. You don't need to tell your kids. No, don't like your kids. You don't need to tell them you read SparkNotes and you have all this great analysis background. And I'll tell you, it's not the creme de la creme of analysis. A very cursory analysis, but it's a great cheat if you want to have some basis for talking to your kids. But I did it with Scarlet Letter. I hadn't read it, and I've read a lot of literature. I'm a literature major, but it's just one I happen to have not read. And I went on SparkNotes. I didn't have time to read it, and we were able to have a really fruitful conversation from it. The other one is, and academia frowns on it, is Wikipedia. It's not accepted in the academic arena as a reliable source, so students can't use it as a resource. But it's a great way if the kids are asking about something and you have no knowledge of it and you want to be able to talk to them about it. Let's say they're studying, I don't know, what are you studying right now, Mr. Turner, in one of your classes? Laws of motion? So I am not a science quiz, so that I would have to go and even Google or use Wikipedia or something, Google what that is. So at least have a basic understanding. So if they ask me about it, at least I can talk to them about it. If not, maybe they can educate me. Or sometimes if they're teaching you something and you know enough, they learn more, because when you teach, you learn, right? And it gives them an opportunity to educate you on some things. But the resources that are great to use are the SparkNotes, Wikipedia, Google. Google is my friend. Yahoo might be your friend, Google's mine. So whatever search engine you like, that's a great resource for helping you. But what I think is a great thing if you can incorporate it into your family time. And I know it's really limited. I know there's a lot of homework that comes with John Adams. But if you have time on a weekend, even one night a week, sit down with your family and read with them. That has been, we haven't done that a ton in our family, but my kids were young, now they're older, but when they were younger, we did it quite a bit. And we have some great discussions that when you can go through a text with them, and you're learning with them. I learn a lot from my kids. I don't know about you guys, but I learn a ton from them. And so it's a great experience. And if you want a recommendation for a really, really good book to start off with, is Little Britches. We were just talking about it, and it's by Ralph Moody. And it's a great family read. It's a little boy that's a protagonist, but I have 2 daughters, and they loved it. It was something that really meant a lot to our family, and I actually drew on a lot of concepts from the book later so that they could just, to talk about things that arose in life. I said, remember how, Ralph dealt with that? And it really can have an impact. So I'm already over time. I have more to cover. I would love to share more with you, but I want to make sure you have time to go through a simulation so you can actually see it in practice. And I know there's a really fun poem that you guys are going to go through, and it's one I really like. So I'll be in there with you participating. But anyway, if you have questions after, if there's anything I can answer, I'd be happy to answer it. I'm on the Facebook school page, and so you can always pop on there. I sometimes see it, sometimes don't. You can message me. I don't know. Anyway, so well, thank you very much, and I hope you got something useful out of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon, and thank you also to all of you coming out in December. That's impressive. I wasn't sure I wanted to be here exactly, but I did sign up, so I guess I did. Because I do really love the Paideia program, the Paideia seminar that we do here at John Adams. It's really important to me. And in fact, it's why I left a really easy job with a really good retirement in Rockland so that I could come and be involved in this type of learning and teaching. So I am excited to be here, and I'm glad that you're here too. And we did have fun, Sharon and I both. It was so fun listening to her even way back when at the beginning of this whole school. So I really appreciate everything that she told you so that we can kind of get right to actually doing some of the things together. So that'll be fun. So this is active thinking. And, whoops, I put my signs. You can read through them. So the overview is Paideia, and of course Mrs. Eurykostas would say it better. She'd say it with her little Greek. She tried to get me to do that today, and it was a failure, so we're just going to go with the American Paideia. But it actually is Greek, and it means nurturing the child. And it really, that's exactly what we're doing, is nurturing the child through these seminars that we have. That was introduced, as Sharon told you, by Mortimer Adler. It was brought into the American school system in 1982 because of his concern that we were already starting to teach too much to the test and the minute details without teaching children or students, scholars, how to think. We were just teaching them all these little details that really didn't connect and didn't make any sense at all to them. And so the intent of the seminar is to help them raise their minds up from a state of understanding or appreciating less to a state or understanding of appreciating more. And it really does work. So here are the 3 columns of instruction. Just take my word for the top part. The bottom's all you need anyway. So the 10 to 15% is what's suggested by to be a Paideia school. Would be the direct instruction. Now most schools, most of the traditional schools, that's most of the day. And I'm sure you're aware of that. And if you've gone to college recently, you know that's all of the day if you're going to college often. It is important to have direct instruction. It's designed to help them master the essential information. That's what we're doing right now. We're having this didactic instruction. It can be a demonstration. With science, it could be an experiment. It can be reading. It can be this lecture format that we're doing. But it should only be 10 to 15%. It's structure, it's taking notes, it's practicing recall. But the greatest amount of classroom time should come from the coaching. That's the next section. And Adler defined coaching as something that produces the skills for learning, specifically in the use of language and mathematics. So that's where the teacher is showing the student, the scholar, how to do this, and then they're going on and practicing it themselves. And that should be 70% of the instructional time, when they're actually doing what it is that we're trying to instruct them. But then there comes the part that we're here to talk to about tonight, and that should be the 15 to 20% of classroom time, and that is the seminar. Now, I have used Socratic seminar before, and I wasn't as impressed. This is based on the Socratic idea, but it is different. And the big difference is that you use a text. And that's huge to me, because you're not just sitting around talking about, how you're going to save the world. You're actually thinking. You're learning how to think. You're looking at a piece of information, and you're actually analyzing that. And so it is discussion that fosters the growth of the mind. It's discussion that helps the scholars understand basic ideas and issues. So 15 to 20% of the time dedicated to that is really worth it. And all of this needs to be actively put together. So subjects across all areas, and I'm lucky I get to teach history and English both, and so I'm able to do that really easily. I'm able to meld those together, and that works really well. Okay, so the seminar cycle. You have some pre-seminar contact activities. Let's look at your first handout that I gave you. This is one that I just did in my advisory class, 8th graders, and I had just seen the movie Lincoln, and they're always wanting to do something aside from what we're supposed to do in advisory. So once in a while, we'll do something like this. And so this was last week, and we were really interested in the Gettysburg Address, and they actually asked for this. So we were interested in the Gettysburg Address, and so we talked about it. We set the stage. We had, even though they're not in my class any longer, we did get together, and you can see on the second page, these are the things we did. So if you look on the back, the things that we did before the seminar, we read it, we did a T-chart, they talked to each other about it, I gave them the background, and so they had a little background ahead of time, because this was advisory, not a regular classroom, so we talked about it first. But then if you look at the opening question, it was amazing how much mileage I got out of that one. So we talk about it ahead of time, and then we do a pre-seminar process. So those are the things that are on top that are giving us trouble. Eyes on the speaker, disagreeing is okay, we go over that. We set a group goal. Usually the group goal still is that you have to refer to the text. We're still mastering that. We're working on that. So that's usually the group goal. But then they set individual goals too, like I'm going to talk 2 times, or I'm going to talk 1 time, or I'm not going to talk as much. We have a combination of students. Sometimes, now that they're comfortable, especially my 8th graders, the 7th graders are getting there, but the 8th graders, it almost sounds like, that little scene out of Finding Nemo. Mine, 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 mine. They're all so excited they want to talk at once. But we have to stop, listen first, stay focused on the text, participate but don't dominate. So those are the types of process activities that I'm referring to. And then there's a formal seminar dialogue where we carry on these questions. So the first question I asked them was, we read the speech aloud again. We always say we have to do it 3 times in order to really grasp before we start talking about it. And there are 266 words in the Gettysburg Address, and I asked them which one was most significant. And we actually, to get started, we did a round robin, which we'll do tonight as well. So you just go from one person to the next. And that gets the ice broken. They all just say one thing. But they said what and why. And it was just really fascinating how much more wise they've even become in a year since they were last with, the things that they picked out, the things that were important. So if you look on this, number 2 on the core questions. So you'd go through, you have your opening question, your core questions, and then your closing questions. And at the same time, you're keeping track. They love this. You're keeping track on an oval of who's speaking. So you can see, it looks like a cat has played with the yarn, and you see if someone's dominating, and then it's actually evidence. They'll look, ooh, I guess I spoke a little too much. If you've got a real heavy line that goes, back and forth to them all the time. So, but as you're talking, then they are, we're keeping track, and I'm listening, and so things may change. But this is the seminar this is what I wrote to start with, or this is what I had to start with. So number 2 says, why does Lincoln say that they cannot dedicate, cannot consecrate, cannot hallow this ground, when that is precisely the purpose of the ceremony? And they had it right away. He said, no, it was the people who died that consecrated this ground. I mean, they were right on. They knew it right away. But this last one is the one that we ran over time, and I was having to kick them out in order to let Dr. Foreman come in and do his mentoring. They did not want to stop. With this last closing question, it says, Lincoln closes the Gettysburg Address by challenging his audience. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us. Were he alive today, what great task do you think Lincoln would challenge us with? In what ways could we rise to the challenge? Boy, that opened up some discussion. And thinking, great thinking. I mean, it was fabulous. It was a wonderful experience that I enjoyed. And then the post-process, you need to do something with it. Again, something I really like about Paideia versus Socratic. You create something. So in this case, because it's advisory and a seminar should take about an hour for that grade, we have to spread it out, when we're creating something. But you'll see there's a list of people that we're pretending to be, and then they're going to write a letter to a friend that shares the same perspective. So they're pretending they're back in 1863. Maybe they were the mother of a son who was killed in battle, or and then that solidifies it in writing, and it's a good writing, and it's synergy again between what they're learning, what they're thinking, and what they're creating. So then what I added in here, so that's the activity portion, and that's it for that part. Not close enough. Or my battery's on there. Oh. Well, that works too. Oh, maybe. Okay. So then the next part of your handout, I just got these online. These are just questions that I thought you might be able to do around the dinner table. You're in a perfect situation for discussion. You're in the same shape usually that we try to create for the discussion at the dinner table. So I just grabbed some questions, some different types of questions, so that you've got them there to get you started when you have your dinner time discussion at home. I thought it would be useful. Uh-oh. I don't know why it won't, thank you. My clicker was working before. Thanks. Oh, well. Then I've given you another set of questions. These are seminar rules and practices, just to reinforce what I was just saying. So things that you can use in your family and when you have your discussions. But I was just thinking the dinner table is very similar to what we do. So the one that we're going to do tonight, what I did ahead of time was we're working on a poetry book. So just to let you know, and that's the project. That's the thing we're working on. And so we're pulling in all different types of poems, and we're doing some of them in Paideia, some in class discussion. But it really is good to do the Paideia, and I always have to put a little reminder to myself, because when you are doing just a class discussion, you're still up there, and I still talk too much. If I'm doing the class discussion, it's still 97% me. But if I'm doing a seminar, I've got it really regulated and in control, and it's probably 3 or 4% me. And the idea is that you give it to them, that it's not you. And so I really, really do believe in this, rather than just having a discussion. But anyway, so a bestiary of poetic terms comes next, and we would have discussed this dactyl here. He's the one that has the falling rhythm. So if you look at the different types of rhythms of different poems, we've been discussing that. They're writing some of their own, they're pulling some out that they like, but they have to follow some of these different terms while they're doing it. So you see it's beats such as these can be termed falling rhythms. So that's the dactyl, and that's what our poem is as well. And when we had someone come and train us, a guru from the Paideia Institute came and trained us, he used this poem that I'm going to share with you. I'm sharing it with you because it's really short, and that works for tonight. But he used it, and then he kept saying that the we on the end that you'll see should be emphasized. And I thought, that just can't be right. But he wasn't doing quite the Paideia thing I would have liked. He didn't really want to hear what we had to say. He was sure he was right. And so I was determined. I went and actually found the poet, and I have her reading it herself. We'll listen to that so you get a good reading of how she read it. And then he came to observe me, and of course I used this one with that poem. And he said, okay, you were right. And sometimes that means something to me, sorry. Anyway, so we'll listen to it being read by Gwendolyn Brooks, and it's the very last one. that last part of your handout. Oh, do you think I'm hooked up to speakers? I was told I was, but I'm not thinking I am. So we're going to listen real close, maybe?
You might need to have that if it's...
You see something I could plug in?
You put it to the microphone.
I probably can take it to the microphone. I don't think I need it. That's okay. Let's try. Is that easy? Okay, let's do that. Right there. Thank you. I guess I have it set kind of loud. It says it is. Should we try this on my microphone? Whoa. Over here, it said it was playing, and we couldn't hear it. So we'll try again over here. Technology, but you gotta love it.
This one is a distillation of my
Can you hear?
interest. Turn it toward that I saw
What?
turn it toward my home during school hours, and you might have asked.
I don't know where the speakers are.
I am. I try to distill their own feelings for my use. We real cool, the pool players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight, we sing sin, we sin gin, we jazz June, we dive soon.
Okay, so if we can actually get in a seminar circle, that would be great. So what that is, it looks like an egg. It's not really a circle. So if everybody could just grab your chairs, it's going to be big.